Over the years, I've seen interesting happenings that have resulted in somehow the transgender issue becoming a men's issue. The reason for that is pretty obvious if one is keeping the tabs of how the Western civilization is moving ahead as the equality becomes more and more helpful for men because of a large gap between how it was perceived back then and how it is being perceived now. A lot of anguish at equality by the moderates is beginning to surface, which is characteristics of every society who is in the stage of modernity where women are valued very high above men because of lack of boss and other play stuff which grants men the value that puts them equal to women. As such, without the presence of wars and a lot of violence, the values of men has decreased, and as such, the very people who adopted the stance of equality when it benefited women and closed the gaps between men and women in favor of women are now against the very concept of equality when it provides a little bit of refuge to men. In light of this, let's read an article and see how it is appearing that the trans issue is becoming a men's rights issue, and a men's rights issue at this stage is a right wing issue because it is a matter of fact that most men vote right wing and most women vote left wing. As such, let's read this article and try to understand what it is saying and make an inference based on this article towards the direction of this sort of a civil war between trans exclusionary radical feminists and progressive feminists. So let's begin and read the salient points in this article and try to gain an understanding of what the article intends to say. So let's begin. This is an article on Quillette and it talks about a phenomena in which men who identify as women and have committed uh, violent crimes are being allowed to spend time in women's jails and be a prisoner there instead of being a prisoner in male prisons. So this Quillette story wonders in the very title itself as why only a few people are against this phenomenon. One of the interesting things that you can catch just by seeing the title of the article is that it invokes the caring nature of people towards women in order to make an argument in the very title of itself. Women have known from a long time that the society is lenient towards them and cares about them, and that is what they have used to create this whole movement of feminism, in which they know that by whining and complaining they will get the rights they want and the privileges because the society cares about them. But in order to be seen as a victim, when portrayed as they are being wronged by the society, which this article would do as we go on and see it further. But somehow they also express wonder as to why few people are caring. If they are consistent with their ideology and the societies are sexist against women by default, then there should be no surprise that women are being harmed in this society. But women know that if they complain about the harm because the society cares about them, it will provide them refuge. But in order to ask that refuge, not just emotionally but principally, they'll have to pretend that they are the victims. So, in that sense, it is to be realized that very from right at the start, before even a feminist speaks anything, you know that her premise is false. Because if the society was against women and men were bigoted towards women, who could in the whole world save women? The reason why women have any safety that they have, whether it be large or small, is because of men who performs job as people in the police or in the medical sciences or the actual sciences overwhelmingly is creating a web of protection in which the feminism can thrive. The very article in its title shows how the rhetoric changes in a case where women are demanding than men and the society provide them with the privileges that others don't have. They invoke the emotions that the people feel towards women that they don't towards men. But when they are asking for equal rights and getting the same privileges that men have, women are made the victim. And the thread is intertwined in this article very carefully and neatly, which we will just deconstruct and see how the contradictory ideology is maintained. So let's read this article, or at least the important points. In 2015, the British Association of Gender Identity Specialists submitted a written brief to the Transgender Equality Inquiry, which had been undertaken by the UK Parliament's Women and Equalities Committee, explaining why it was naive to suggest that nobody would seek to pretend transsexual status in prison if this were not actually the case. First of all, people pretend a lot of things. It is not naive to suggest that people pretend. It is surprising to suggest that the people will not pretend. There was no need for a report in this case. However, the question here is not about the report which suggests whether the transgenders or transsexuals in the prison are actually transsexuals, because even if they weren't, but they were a normal regular man, and in the other case, if they were a transsexual, and in both the cases if they would have committed a violent offense, there is no reason to suggest that one would be more of a danger to the woman than the other, because they both are there in the prison for a violent crime. So identification as a transsexual does not matter when it is in regards to the safety of others, because there is no reason to believe that transsexuals commit crimes at a rate lesser than men when they both have been violent in the past. So the distinction between actual transsexuals and fake transsexuals does not matter. Yet you will see how it is made to matter as the article goes on, because the article does not want to portray itself as being against the core of the transsexual ideology, but it is a rant against the men themselves. There are, to those of us who actually interview the prisoners, in fact, very many reasons why people might pretend this, wrote Dr. James Barrett. These vary from the opportunity to have trips out of prison through to a desire for a transfer to the female estate. through to the idea that a parole board will receive somebody who's a female as being less dangerous, through to a belief that hormone treatment will actually render one less dangerous, through to wanting a special or protected status within the prison system, or even a plethora of prison intelligence information suggesting that the driving force was a desire to make subsequent sexual offending very much easier, females being generally perceived as low risk in this regard. All of these points, which this article supports as a case for itself, show how bad men are treated while they are in the prison. When the prisoners who are male actually believe that they will have easier time being in a female prison as a female than being in a male prison as a male, it shows something wrong with the society. But that obviously does not matter. It doesn't matter that women have privileges even in the prison, even in the cases that they are themselves violent offenders, that they themselves be responsible for sexual offenses. The men who want to use that privilege for themselves, even though they are fewer in number than the women who use that privilege, they are the enemy. They are the bad guys. This statement, for once, in the eyes of the moderates and in their minds, do not show how equality has failed because they were never concerned with equality in the first place. They believed right from the start that males are more dangerous, that female sexual offenses or the sexual offenses committed by females were less worse, that females should get extra privileges in the prison, and on and on and on. The reason for creation of feminism or egalitarianism was to make people who are perceived as weak rise to the status of the people who are perceived as strong. In that sense, the moderates' use of egalitarianism as the striving point for the Western civilization was subversive at best and an outright dishonesty at the worst. In such a case, the real enemy of the people who are standing on the shallows of the modern society, trying to save it by becoming masculine and trying to protect their masculinity, are not some leftists nor the feminists, but the very moderates themselves, the fathers, the brothers, the wives, the mothers, the sisters, and the children. They are the enemy of the right wing. The right wing here separates from all sorts of traditionalistic notions because the traditionalist people are very likely candidate of the ones who believe that the male crime is a lot worse than a female crime even in the society where egalitarianism is accepted. As such, their right is against the tradition itself, the tradition of egalitarianism and the tradition of traditionalism. The right is thus not synonymous with traditionalism. They are two different entities, often in opposition with each other, making this generation or this time perhaps the most interesting time that people will see in their lives. The article further goes on to say that the idea that many male offenders would opt to serve their sentences in women's correctional facilities is not something that should shock a thinking person. But it should shock a thinking person if he believes that there is actual equality in the prisons, that the violent offenders, no matter their gender, are treated the same. But it is funny to realize that even in the case when the violent offenders, when the people who are in the jail are violent offenders, The gender gap is there, and in the cases it harms the males, it is not a concern of anyone in the society. Even the prisoners are treated distinctly, who are violent or who have been violent. What to say of normal and regular men? The article discusses a policy which is known as self ID, in which a person identifies himself as a male or a female, and that allows him to choose the prison of his choice in regards to the gender. The self identification either should exist or not. It should not be that only in the case of prisons that privilege is taken away. Either people should be able to self identify themselves in all situations of merit where they interact with an authority, or they should not be able to self identify. So, self ID is not a claim that is related just to the prisons. It is related to a larger debate whether self identification of one's own gender makes sense in any context, even if that context is not a harmful one. Because when you say that the self identification is allowable in the areas where less harm may occur, but it is allowable in the areas where more, it's not allowable in the areas where more harm occurs, you are treading on a very soft and arbitrary boundary. And that boundary itself is against the concept of liberty and of rational knowledge, for the harm does not dictate the truth. Either trans women are actually women or they are not. It doesn't matter whether they are or whether they would be violent or would cause harm to others. That is irrelevant to the truth. The article states further, when these men do abuse female inmates, it is referred to for official purposes as female perpetrated violence, since that is how the perpetrator is classified. I learned about this policy and the lobby effort behind it from British radical feminists on Twitter. Just pause here for a moment. Why it is wrong to refer, in the cases of very few trans women that are out there, to refer to their crimes as female perpetrated violence? Why is that problematic? Unless women know that female perpetrated violence is treated as less worse than the male perpetrated violence. It doesn't matter how the violence is classified, especially if both trans men and trans women exist, and the 5% of population, or perhaps even lesser than that, 3%, won't change the crime rate of females or males appreciably. While it may be against the truth to classify the violence as female perpetrated violence when that the violence is committed by trans women, why is it such a big deal? If we try to identify a trans woman as a woman in all other cases, why not for the cases of the crime statistics? Unless and until it offers some advantage to some group over the other. That knowledge, which may seem like a sort of an esoteric knowledge that is beyond the reach of the people, has been the common knowledge for years and easily visible in the stats which show a prison and sentencing gap between men and women for the same crimes that are committed. The article then talks about few cases revolving the people, the men who identified as women and were taken to women's prison, and how that affected women. It is interesting to note that in the case of US, in prisons, in jails, the homicide rate is around 128 per 100,000. That is a very high homicide rate for a place in which there is a lot of police and a lot of regulations. But up until now, nobody cared. Is murder worse or sexual assault? If it is true, even if it is true, that men are more likely to commit sexual assault on women, and if they have committed sexual assault on women previously, they would be a threat to women. If that is actually or really the case, then why wouldn't the people who have been serial murderers in the past not also be a threat to men? If that is really the case, also, then all the violent criminals, regardless of their gender, should be housed separately. But nobody cared when the murderers and the rapists of the same gender were being put along with the people, along uh, with the people of a particular gender. Only when there is a cross placement, it becomes the issue. The article points to this fact subsequently and states that the commonly held belief that a castrated male offender poses minimal threat to females is a myth. There is certainly no rational reason why a male serial predator should be housed with women, many of whom have a history of being abused by men. It is interesting to note that the women who are in the prison for some or the other crime are also presented as victims, while the males who are there are presented as serial predators. When both of them are in the jail, if the male is a serial predator, a lot of women in the women's prison are also. They have been also convicted of crimes, in many cases violent crimes, but they are also presented as sort of victim to other men. The article then states offenders are sent to the prison as punishment. They are not sent to prison to be punished. That is not true. People are sent to the prison to be punished. The prison takes away their rights, takes away their freedom, and prevents them from accessing the very things that provide dignity to each individual. The article states that locking the woman with the violent men is cruel and unusual punishment. The men are obviously violent, or they are violent in the eyes of the law because they have been convicted of violent offenses. But so are the women. The women are also there in prison on account, in many cases, of having been committed violent offenses. But it doesn't say apply the adjective of violent to the women, but only to the men, and then refers to it as cruel and unusual punishment, which no conservative who agrees with judicial rule and law as something of a sane argument. It is not a cruel and unusual punishment to be housed with violent people because men in the prisons face that and has been facing that for years and years, for perhaps centuries. It is a basic fact, the article then goes on to say that men are physically stronger than women, and they regularly take advantage of this fact in every imaginable context to dominate and abuse women. And here you see how the author says that men are basically anti women and they seek to dominate and abuse women everywhere they can. But if that is really the case, then why shouldn't men just accept that and say, yeah, we are doing it? Here is the fact that I mentioned when I was referring to the title. The society, and the men specifically who are in the power, are presented as oppressors to argue that women should not face a cruel and unusual punishment that is classified as a right, that is classified as an infringement of right in US Constitution and other places in various degrees. But when the women have to appeal to men to ask for a privilege, then the emotional sense of the men, which is protective towards women, is appealed. If men are really the dominators and abusers of women in every situation, in every context in which it is possible, then there is no reason why men should care about women in this case too. It logically makes sense because if the men are actual sexual abusers, then it is in their interest that this transgender policy gets enacted fully, and they should also fight for their gender without the regards to consequences to women if they are anti women. But obviously, the author knows that this is not true because if men were really anti women, then nobody would be able to save women. The author is using this as a rhetoric to present women as victims so everybody sympathizes with them. Every non misogynist, every non rapist sympathizes with them, and anyone who is against must be pro rape or sexual assault or domestic abuse. The article then shares the story of a woman to generate an emotional response, but the story of all the men and all the women who are subjected to violent or sexual offenses by the people of their same gender, which occur at a very high rate in US and Western prisons. Those cases are completely ignored. Nobody would present those cases unless they are politically beneficial as heart wrenching anecdotes because there is no benefit in doing that. If a woman was raped by a woman or assaulted by a woman in a women's prison, it doesn't matter. If a man was raped or assaulted or even killed by a man in men's prison, who cares about that? Nobody. This article then makes the statement that it is of utmost importance to realize why the transgender issue has actually become the men's right and the right wing issue, because the feminist issue is still the left wing issue. The article states, and on this I wouldn't comment, but allow you to decide. What do you think about it? It was nauseating to see those two men so cavalierly discussing this issue in public while paying no attention whatsoever to the reason why we have sex based protections in the first place to protect women from male violence. Self identification has marched forward despite there being no evidence supporting the claim that those men pose any less of a threat to women than other men. What's more, our national media, which seems anxious to produce splashy stories on rape culture in every other context, continues to ignore the issue. What could be more emblematic of a rape culture than a log building full of women forced to live with an actual rapist? In the UK, currently 1 in 50 male prisoners are now claiming to be a woman. There is every reason to assume that the needless danger facing these women will only escalate as more male prisoners become aware of this self identification escape hatch. Meanwhile, we women are dismissed or berated as transphobes when we voice concerns. It is a scandal that is now in plain sight. No woman should tolerate this appalling situation, and no civilized country should ask her to. As I say it, I put my head and look at all the males who have been killed in males prison of males by males and have accepted this fate because the civilized country has asked them to. I tip my hat to them, though I haven't worn any. This false imaginary hat of chivalry is not reserved for women anymore. It is reserved for men because men are the only ones who are protecting the society in the form, in the tattered form it exists. And my heart commends them for all they have done. But perhaps it is time to stop doing that.